My name is Wilma Bradford, 63 years old, and I never thought I'd be standing in the back of a church watching my only son's bride publicly humiliate me at their wedding, the same wedding I spent $40,000 on. When Catherine pointed her manicured finger at me and shouted those words, something inside me finally snapped. 20 years of being the perfect mother-in-law material hadn't prepared me for this betrayal. But I had an ace up my sleeve she never saw coming. Before I share what happened next, where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and subscribe. If you want to hear how this mother of the groom turned the tables on the bride who tried to erase her from her own son's wedding. I want to take you back to the beginning to help you understand how I ended up in this heartbreaking situation. My son Thomas is 32 now, but I still remember him as that brave, 12-year-old boy who held my hand at his father's funeral. My husband Robert died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving me to raise our son alone. Those were difficult years, working as a nurse during the day and picking up evening shifts at a local diner to make ends meet. But Thomas was worth every sacrifice. I made sure he had everything he needed: good schools, summer camps, and eventually college. I still remember the pride that swelled in my chest when he graduated from law school, top of his class with job offers from 3 prestigious firms. I knew Robert would have been just as proud of the man our son had become. Thomas and I have always been close. Even when he moved out for college, he would call me every Sunday night, without fail. When he started his career, he made time for our weekly dinners, despite his busy schedule. He would share stories about his cases, the ones he could talk about anyway, and I would listen, amazed at how my little boy had grown into such an intelligent, compassionate man. 2 years ago, Thomas called me on a Tuesday instead of our usual Sunday. I knew immediately something important had happened. His voice was different, excited, nervous. "Mom, I met someone," he said. "Her name is Catherine Andrews, and she works at the firm. She's incredible." That was the first time I heard her name, but certainly not the last. Catherine was 30, beautiful, and came from what appeared to be a wealthy family. Thomas told me she had graduated from an Ivy League school and specialized in corporate law. Her parents owned property in the Hamptons and had connections with some influential people in New York. I remember our first meeting clearly. Thomas brought her to our regular Sunday dinner, which I had spent all day preparing. Catherine arrived in designer clothes, her dark hair perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place. She complimented my home, though I caught a slight grimace when she thought I wasn't looking. She picked at the pot roast I had spent hours making, claiming she was watching her figure. Something about her felt off to me, but I pushed those thoughts aside. My son was clearly smitten, and that was what mattered. If she made him happy, I would make every effort to welcome her into our family. Over the next few months, I tried everything to build a relationship with Catherine. I invited her for lunch, sent thoughtful gifts, and even offered to help her with a charity event she was organizing for the law firm. Each time she was polite but distant. There was a calculated quality to her interactions with me that left me feeling uneasy. Despite my reservations, I kept trying. Thomas seemed happier than I had seen him in years, and I wanted to support their relationship. When he called me 6 months ago to announce their engagement, I forced excitement into my voice, even as a knot formed in my stomach. "We're thinking about a fall wedding," Thomas said. "Something elegant, but not too over the top." 2 days later, Thomas asked if we could meet for coffee. It was unusual. Our dinners were our tradition, but I agreed. When we met, he seemed uncomfortable fidgeting with his coffee cup. "Mom, there's something I need to ask you," he began. "Catherine's parents are having some financial issues right now. They've had some investments go bad, and they're not in a position to help much with the wedding." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I know it's traditionally the bride's family who pays, but would you be willing to help us, just with some of the expenses?" I agreed immediately. Of course, I would help my only son with his wedding. What I didn't realize then was that some of the expenses would turn into almost the entire wedding. Catherine's expensive tastes and her parents' supposedly temporary financial situation meant that I ended up committing to $40,000, nearly all of my savings. But Thomas was my world, and I wanted his day to be special. Little did I know the nightmare that was about to unfold. The wedding planning process began with enthusiasm, but quickly soured. Despite my significant financial contribution, Catherine systematically excluded me from most decisions. The first red flag appeared when Catherine forgot to invite me to tour potential wedding venues. "Oh, did I not tell you?" Catherine said when I called to ask about the appointment time. "We actually went yesterday. We found the perfect place too, the Grand Palace Hotel downtown." I knew that venue. It was one of the most expensive in the city. When I gently suggested something more modest might be appropriate, Catherine's expression hardened. "Thomas and I deserve the best day possible, Wilma. Don't you want that for your son?" She always knew how to use my love for Thomas against me. I backed down immediately, writing the first of many large checks. A week later, I was sorting through some of my late mother's belongings when I found her vintage pearl necklace. It was a beautiful piece with a rich family history, having been worn by 3 generations of brides in our family. I thought it would be perfect for Catherine's something borrowed. When I showed it to her over dinner, Catherine barely glanced at it. "That's really sweet, Wilma, but I've already arranged for Harry Winston to loan me jewelry for the wedding. It's going to be featured in their social media campaign." Thomas jumped in. "Mom, isn't that amazing? Catherine's going to be like a model." I smiled weakly and put the necklace away, another family tradition discarded. The incidents continued to pile up. Catherine would schedule meetings with vendors, then change the times without telling me. When I would inevitably miss them, she would sigh dramatically in front of Thomas. "Your mother seems so disinterested in our wedding planning," I overheard her tell him one evening. "I know she's busy, but this is supposed to be important." Thomas defended me, but I could see doubt creeping into his eyes. The distance between us grew as Catherine inserted herself further into our relationship. Our weekly dinners became monthly, then sporadic. When we did meet, Catherine was always present, controlling the conversation and limiting my time alone with my son. One afternoon, while meeting with a florist Catherine had selected, I witnessed another disturbing moment. When the florist asked about my input on the centerpieces, Catherine laughed lightly. "Oh, Wilma wouldn't know Lily of the Valley from a daisy. She's more of a plastic flowers type of woman, aren't you, Wilma? We appreciate her checkbook, though." The florist looked uncomfortable, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. Still, I said nothing, not wanting to create conflict that might upset Thomas. The most painful incident occurred 3 weeks before the wedding. I received a call from the DJ, who introduced himself and asked about my song choice for the mother-son dance. "I'm sorry," I said, confused. "Catherine hasn't mentioned anything about this to me." There was an awkward pause. "Oh, I see," the DJ finally replied. "Ms. Andrews told me there wouldn't be a mother-son dance. She said you weren't interested." My heart sank. A mother-son dance was something I had dreamed about since Thomas was small. I confronted Catherine about it that evening as calmly as I could. "There must have been a misunderstanding with the DJ," I said. Catherine shrugged. "The timeline is already so tight, Wilma. And Thomas mentioned you don't really dance, so I thought I was doing you a favor. I looked at Thomas, who seemed surprised. I never said that, Kat. You did, honey. Remember when we were discussing the reception? She turned to me with a practiced, sympathetic expression. It's not a big deal, though. We can squeeze it in if it's that important to you. I felt like I was going crazy. Had Thomas really said that I couldn't remember him ever mentioning I didn't like to dance? In fact, dancing had been one of the joys I shared with his father. But Catherine spoke with such confidence that I began to doubt my own memories. As the wedding date approached, I noticed Thomas becoming increasingly distant. When I tried to talk to him about the wedding or Catherine, he would become defensive or change the subject. I later discovered that Catherine had been feeding him carefully crafted versions of our interactions, painting me as difficult and controlling. Through mutual friends, I learned that Thomas had been telling people I was struggling to let go and making things difficult for Catherine. The son, who once shared everything with me, now viewed me through a lens crafted by his fiancée, and it broke my heart. Despite everything, I continued to write checks and smile through the pain. This was my son's happiness at stake, and I was determined to be the bigger person. But Catherine had an even more devastating move, planned one that would push me to my breaking point. 2 days before the wedding, I was finalizing my outfit and preparing my small speech for the reception when my phone rang. Catherine's name flashed on the screen. Wilma, she said, her voice coldly polite. I'm glad I caught you. Is everything all right? I asked, immediately concerned. There was a problem with the wedding arrangements. Actually, there's been a slight change of plans. The venue has informed us that we're over capacity, and we need to reduce our guest list. I waited, not yet understanding where this was going. Thomas and I have discussed it, and we think it's best if you don't attend the wedding. The words hit me like a physical blow. I must have misheard her. I'm sorry. What did you say? Catherine's voice became impatient. We don't want you at the wedding, Wilma. I know this might come as a surprise, but we've made our decision. But I'm Thomas's mother, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And I've paid for almost everything. Yes, well, the payments have all been processed already, she said dismissively. Look, I might as well be honest with you. I've never liked how clingy you are with Thomas. You're always calling him, always wanting to be involved. It's suffocating. Her voice grew colder. Thomas agrees with me. He thinks you would just make a scene or try to make the day about you somehow. He said you've always been emotional and attention-seeking. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My son, my Thomas, had said these things about me. The room seemed to spin around me. I want to talk to Thomas, I managed to say. He doesn't want to talk to you right now. He finds these confrontations with you draining. But I'm sure he'll reach out after the honeymoon. As if sensing my disbelief, she added, This is for the best, Wilma. A clean break. Thomas needs to focus on our future together, not be tied to his past. I'm sure you understand. After she hung up, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes before frantically calling Thomas. The call went straight to voicemail. I texted him, begging him to call me to explain what was happening. An hour later, I received a brief text. It's for the best, Mom. I'll explain later. 5 words. After everything we had been through together, after all the sacrifices, all the love, all I was worth to my son, was a 5-word text message. I spent that night cycling through shock, disbelief, and gut-wrenching pain. I pulled out old photo albums, tracing Thomas's face from infancy through childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood. The smiling boy, who once couldn't go to sleep without a kiss from his mom, was now a man who was cutting me out of one of the most important days of his life. I cried until there were no tears left, clutching the teddy bear Thomas had given me for Mother's Day when he was 9. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, something shifted inside me. The paralyzing pain gave way to a quiet determination. I had spent my entire life putting my son first. I had sacrificed, compromised, and remained silent when I should have spoken up. But I would not be discarded like this. Not without a fight. If Catherine thought she could simply uninvite me after taking my money, she was about to learn a valuable lesson about messing with a mother's love. Morning brought clarity and purpose. If I was going to fight for my son, I needed information. Something about this situation felt calculated, as if Catherine had been working toward this outcome from the beginning. I needed to understand who I was really dealing with. My first call was to my friend Diane, who worked as a paralegal at the law firm where Thomas and Catherine met. Diane and I had known each other for years, our friendship dating back to when our sons played Little League together. "Diane, I need your help," I said, bypassing our usual pleasantries. "It's about Catherine, Thomas's fiancée. What's going on, Wilma?" I explained the situation, my voice breaking several times, despite my best efforts to remain composed. Diane listened in shocked silence. "That's awful, Wilma. I'm so sorry," she said when I finished. "What can I do? I need to know more about Catherine, her background, her history, anything you can tell me." Diane hesitated. "I shouldn't really share firm information." "Please, Diane, this isn't about gossip. I think my son is in trouble." The line went quiet for a moment before Diane sighed. "All right, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this conversation understood. Of course, Catherine wasn't always Catherine Andrews. She was Catherine Pritchard until about 3 years ago when she divorced her first husband." "First husband," I repeated, stunned. Catherine had told Thomas she had never been married. "Yes, she was married to James Pritchard, a senior partner at Goldstein and Burke. It was a brief marriage, less than 2 years. There were rumors about how it ended." "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that involves missing money and mysterious credit card charges. Nothing was ever proven, but James left the firm suddenly afterward. He moved to Seattle, I believe. Complete career change." My mind was racing. "Did you ever meet his family?" "Just his mother at the firm's holiday party. Margaret Pritchard. Elegant woman, reminded me a bit of you, actually." I scribbled down the name. "Do you have any way to contact her?" Diane was quiet again. "Wilma, are you sure about this? If Thomas finds out, you're digging into Catherine's past." "I'm sure. My son is about to make a terrible mistake, and I'm the only one who might be able to stop it." After some hesitation, Diane agreed to look through her contacts. An hour later, she called back with Margaret Pritchard's phone number. I took a deep breath before dialing. The phone rang 3 times before a refined voice answered. "Hello, Mrs. Pritchard. My name is Wilma Bradford. You don't know me, but our children have something in common. My son is engaged to Catherine Andrews, your former daughter-in-law." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry." Over the next hour, Margaret shared her family's heartbreaking experience with Catherine. The pattern was eerily familiar. Catherine had charmed James, isolated him from his family and friends, and convinced him that his mother was trying to control his life. She had pressured him to invest in various opportunities that turned out to be fraudulent, and by the time the marriage ended, James had lost nearly $200,000. "She's a predator, Mrs. Bradford," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "She targets successful men with close family ties especially those with mothers they respect. Breaking that bond seems to give her some kind of satisfaction. Do you have any proof, anything concrete I could show my son? I kept everything, bank statements, text messages, between James and Catherine, even recordings of some of her more vicious moments when she thought no one was listening. James wanted to move on, forget it ever happened, but I knew someday another mother might need this information. I felt a surge of gratitude for this woman I had never met. Would you be willing to share these with me? I'll do better than that, Margaret replied firmly. Tell me when and where this wedding is happening. I'll bring everything in person. With Margaret's help, I continued my investigation. I discovered that Catherine's parents weren't having financial difficulties at all. They had recently purchased a second vacation home in Aspen and were planning an extended European cruise. The financial troubles had been a convenient fiction to extract money from me. I also learned that Catherine had been systematically poisoning Thomas against me for months. She had shown him altered text messages, purporting to be from me, containing complaints about her and her family. She had told him I had made disparaging remarks about their relationship to mutual friends. None of it was true, but Thomas, blinded by love and manipulation, had believed it all. The more I discovered, the clearer the picture became. Catherine had been planning to cut me out of the wedding and out of Thomas's life from the very beginning. She had just been waiting until all the payments had cleared. Well, she was about to learn that she had underestimated the determination of a mother fighting for her son. With less than 24 hours until the wedding, I needed to act quickly. My first call was to the Grand Palace Hotel, where both the ceremony and reception were scheduled to take place. As the person who had signed the contracts and made the payments, I still had certain rights. "Good morning, this is Wilma Bradford," I said, when the event coordinator answered. "I'm calling about my son's wedding tomorrow." "Yes, Mrs. Bradford, everything is on track for the Bradford Andrews wedding. Is there something I can help you with?" I took a deep breath. "There have been some changes I need to discuss with you. I didn't cancel the wedding entirely. I couldn't do that to Thomas, regardless of how hurt I was. But I did make some significant modifications. The open bar was changed to a cash bar. The elaborate floral arrangements, costing thousands of dollars, were downgraded to simple centerpieces. The 7-tier wedding cake became a modest 3-tier creation. I called the photographer next, reducing the package from the all-day platinum coverage to the basic 3-hour option. The videographer was canceled entirely. The string quartet for the ceremony was replaced with the hotel's standard music system. The most significant change came when I called the caterer. Instead of the premium 5-course meal Catherine had selected, complete with lobster and filet mignon, I switched to the standard chicken and pasta option. The champagne toast would now feature Prosecco rather than the French champagne Catherine had insisted upon. With each call, I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. This wasn't how I had imagined my son's wedding day, but Catherine had forced my hand. If she wanted to exclude the person paying for her dream wedding, she would discover that dreams could quickly turn into nightmares. My final call was to Margaret Pritchard, confirming our plan for the following day. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near the hotel an hour before the ceremony. That evening, I sat down and wrote Thomas a letter. I poured my heart onto the pages, explaining everything I had discovered about Catherine and her past. I detailed the manipulation, the lies, and the calculated way she had driven a wedge between us. I included copies of the evidence Margaret had shared with me, as well as screenshots of my original text messages that Catherine had altered. At the end, I wrote, "Thomas, I have loved you every day of your life, from the moment I knew you existed. That love has never wavered, not for a single second. I understand if you're angry with me for what I've done today. I accept that you might not forgive me for a long time, maybe ever. But I couldn't stand by and watch you marry someone who would intentionally hurt you and destroy our family. Whatever you decide, know that I will always be here for you, waiting with open arms whenever you're ready to come home. I sealed the letter in an envelope, placing it in my purse for the next day. Then I tried to sleep, knowing the most difficult confrontation of my life was just hours away. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a beautiful October day that should have been filled with joy. Instead, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach as I prepared for the showdown ahead. I chose my outfit carefully, an elegant navy blue dress that was tasteful without being flashy. I didn't want to give Catherine any ammunition about me trying to upstage the bride. I styled my hair, applied subtle makeup, and put on the pearl necklace that Catherine had rejected. Then I drove to meet Margaret. She was waiting at the coffee shop, a dignified woman in her late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that showed the same worry I felt. We embraced like old friends, united by our shared experience. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, placing a folder on the table between us. "It won't be easy." "I have to try," I replied. For Thomas, we went over our plan one more time, then made our way to the church. We arrived just as guests were being seated. I could see Catherine's parents near the front, looking smug and self-satisfied. There was no sign of Catherine or Thomas yet. Margaret and I slipped into seats near the back. I noticed several of the wedding party members doing double takes when they saw me whispering to each other in confusion. Word of my presence must have reached Catherine quickly, because within minutes, she emerged from a side room in her wedding gown, her face a mask of fury when she spotted me. She marched down the aisle toward us, her white dress swishing angrily around her legs. The church fell silent as every head turned to watch the spectacle. "What are you even doing here? You were uninvited yesterday," she shouted, her carefully cultivated poise completely abandoned. I remained seated, keeping my voice calm. "This is my son's wedding, Catherine. You are not welcome here. I made that perfectly clear." Her voice echoed through the church guests, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Security. Someone get security." Thomas appeared from the same side room, his face a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. "Cat, what's going on? Your mother crashed our wedding after I specifically told her not to come. She's trying to ruin everything, just like I said she would." Thomas looked at me, hurt and bewilderment in his eyes. "Mom, why are you doing this?" I stood slowly smoothing my dress. "I'm actually leaving Thomas. I won't stay where I'm not wanted." I turned to Catherine, whose triumphant smile vanished with my next words. "But first, I'd like you to meet my special guest, an old friend of yours." Margaret stepped forward, and the blood drained from Catherine's face. "Hello, Catherine," Margaret said evenly. "Or should I call you Catherine Pritchard? It's been a while." "Who is this?" Thomas asked, looking between Catherine and Margaret. "This is Margaret Pritchard," I explained gently. "Catherine's former mother-in-law." Catherine recovered quickly, her face hardening. "This is ridiculous. I've never been married before. This woman is clearly confused." Margaret opened the folder she was carrying. "I have the marriage certificate, divorce papers, and financial records right here, Thomas. Catherine was married to my son James for almost 2 years before she cleaned out their accounts and left him." Catherine lunged for the folder, but Thomas was faster taking it from Margaret's hands. He began flipping through the documents, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "There's more," I said softly. "She's been lying about her parents' financial situation. They aren't in any trouble, she just wanted me to pay for everything. And those text messages she showed you, the ones where I supposedly said those terrible things about her, they were altered." I handed Thomas my phone, showing him the original messages alongside the versions Catherine had shown him. His face paled as he compared them. "Catherine," he said, his voice barely audible, "is this true?" Catherine's demeanor changed instantly. Her eyes filled with tears, her voice becoming small and vulnerable. "Thomas, baby, you can't believe this. They're obviously working together to break us up. Your mother has always been jealous of our relationship." "Then explain these," Thomas said, holding up bank statements showing large transfers from his and Catherine's joint account to accounts in her name only. "And this," he held up their marriage certificate, dated 3 years earlier. Catherine's eyes darted around the church, taking in the shocked faces of the guests, many of whom were now standing to get a better view of the unfolding drama. "Fine," she snapped, dropping the tearful act. "So, I was married before. It's not a crime. And yes, I moved some money to protect it. Your mother was trying to control our finances, just like she controls everything else in your life. My mother has never tried to control me," Thomas said, his voice growing stronger. "She's only ever supported me. You're the one who's been controlling Catherine. You're the one who lied, manipulated, and tried to cut me off from my family." Catherine's face contorted with rage. "This is all your fault," she screamed, pointing at me. "You couldn't stand to see your precious son with someone else. You had to ruin everything." A murmur ran through the crowd. Catherine spun around, suddenly aware of her audience. Her shoulders lumped slightly, before she straightened, a cold smile spreading across her face. "You know what, fine. The wedding's off. I never wanted this tacky ceremony anyway." She turned to Thomas. "And you can forget about our future together. I deserve better than a mama's boy who can't cut the apron strings." With that parting shot, she stormed out of the church, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. One of her bridesmaids hurried after her, while the others stood frozen in shock. Thomas turned to me, his face a storm of emotions. "Mom, could we have a moment in private?" I nodded, and we moved to a small antechamber off the main church, Margaret discreetly staying behind to answer the questions that were surely flying among the guests. As the door closed behind us, I braced myself for Thomas's anger. Instead, my strong, confident son crumpled before my eyes, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I don't know how I could have been so blind." In that small church room, Thomas and I had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. He confessed that Catherine had been slowly poisoning him against me, feeding him stories about things I had supposedly said or done. When she told him she was uninviting me to the wedding, she claimed I had threatened to make a scene and ruin their day. "I should have called you immediately," he said, wiping his eyes. "I should have questioned it, but everything had become so confused and she was so convincing." "She's had a lot of practice, sweetheart," I said gently. "Margaret told me Catherine did the same thing to her son. It's a pattern." Thomas looked down at the folder of evidence in his hands. "All this time, she was just using me. Maybe for my money, maybe for the connections at the firm. I don't even know anymore." "I'm sorry it ended this way," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I had never wanted to see my son in such pain. "No, don't apologize. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. He took my hands in his. Can you ever forgive me for how I've treated you? There's nothing to forgive. You were manipulated by someone who's very skilled at it. The important thing is that we found the truth before it was too late. We embraced, and I felt the weight of the past months lifting. My son was back, the real Thomas, not the distant, defensive man Catherine had created. After collecting ourselves, we returned to the church where confused and concerned guests were waiting. Thomas addressed them with a dignity that made my heart swell with pride. I want to apologize to everyone for what you've witnessed today. The wedding will not be taking place. A few gasps echoed through the church. I've just learned some disturbing information about my relationship that makes it impossible to proceed. I'm grateful to my mother and to Margaret Pritchard for having the courage to bring this to light, even knowing I might not believe them. He paused, his voice steadying. For those who have traveled to be here, I'm truly sorry for the inconvenience. There will be food and drinks at the hotel for anyone who wishes to join us. It won't be the celebration we planned, but perhaps we can make it a different kind of gathering, one of honesty and new beginnings. Many guests approached us afterward, expressing support and surprisingly relief. Several of Thomas's longtime friends admitted they had harbored concerns about Catherine, but hadn't known how to broach the subject. Two of his colleagues from the firm revealed that there had been rumors about Catherine's past, but no one had wanted to interfere. We should have said something, his friend Michael told him, clapping him on the shoulder. But man, she had you so isolated lately. We barely got to see you. Catherine's parents had slipped away during the confrontation, presumably to find their daughter. I felt a moment of pity for them, wondering if they knew the true nature of the woman they had raised. The reception that followed at the hotel was nothing like the lavish affair Catherine had planned. The simplified decorations, reduced menu, and cash bar were noticeable, but no one complained. Instead, there was an atmosphere of genuine warmth and support as friends and family rallied around Thomas. Margaret joined us, forming an instant connection with Thomas. They shared stories about their experiences with Catherine, finding healing in the similarities of their ordeals. "You've got a remarkable mother," Margaret told Thomas at one point. "My James wasn't so fortunate. He wouldn't listen until it was too late." "Where is your son now?" Thomas asked. "Seattle. He's rebuilding his life slowly. The financial loss was significant, but the emotional damage was worse. Catherine has a gift for finding your insecurities and exploiting them." Thomas nodded, understanding all too well. "I'd like to talk to him sometime, if that would be okay." "I think he'd like that," Margaret replied with a gentle smile. As the impromptu gathering wound down, Thomas and I found ourselves sitting alone at a table watching the few remaining guests say their goodbyes. "What now?" he asked, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. "Now we heal," I said simply. Together. The days and weeks that followed were challenging but healing. Thomas moved temporarily back into his old room at my house, needing the comfort of home as he processed the betrayal and the near miss of a disastrous marriage. We learned that Catherine had left town immediately after the confrontation, fleeing to her parents' home in the Hamptons. She had attempted to withdraw the remaining funds from her and Thomas's joint accounts before leaving, but Thomas had been quick enough to freeze the accounts after our conversation at the church. Thomas began therapy, working through the complex emotions of having been manipulated and nearly cut off from his family. His therapist helped him understand the tactics Catherine had used and why he had been vulnerable to them. She targeted my insecurities about being successful enough, about living up to Dad's memory. He explained to me one evening, Every time I questioned something, she would make me feel like I was being paranoid or controlling. Through Margaret Thomas connected with her son, James Catherine's ex-husband. The two men formed an unexpected friendship, united by their shared experience. James, further along in his healing journey, provided Thomas with perspective and hope. "He told me it gets better," Thomas said after their first video call, "that eventually you stop second-guessing every relationship and learn to trust again." I introduced Thomas to a support group for survivors of manipulative relationships. Watching him share his story and listen to others was profoundly moving. My son, who had always been strong for others, was learning that true strength sometimes means being vulnerable. 3 months after the wedding, we received news that Catherine had become engaged to a wealthy businessman in Connecticut. Thomas's first reaction was concern for the man and his family. "Should we warn him?" he asked me. We discussed it at length and ultimately decided to have James reach out discreetly to the man's family with information about Catherine's pattern. Whether they would believe it or not was beyond our control, but we had done what we could. As for the financial aftermath, the wedding cancellation had been costly. Despite my last-minute changes, we had lost deposits and faced some cancellation fees. But compared to the lifetime of unhappiness Thomas had avoided, it seemed a small price to pay. 6 months after that fateful day at the church, Thomas was beginning to date again, cautiously, and with a much clearer perspective on healthy relationships. He had moved back to his own apartment, but maintained our weekly dinner tradition. Our bond, tested by Catherine's manipulation, had emerged stronger than ever. One Sunday evening, as we finished our meal, Thomas reached across the table and took my hand. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what happened with Catherine." I waited, giving him space to continue. "At first, I was so angry at her, at myself for being fooled. But lately, I've been feeling something unexpected gratitude." "Gratitude?" I asked, surprised. He nodded. "I'm grateful that you loved me enough to risk my anger by telling me the truth. I'm grateful that this happened before we were married, before there were children involved. And I'm grateful for the lessons I've learned about what love really is." "And what is it?" I asked softly. "Love isn't about isolation or control. It's not about cutting people off from their support systems." His eyes met mine, clear and certain. "Real love is what you've always shown me, supporting, without smothering, being honest, even when it's difficult, and always being there, no matter what." In that moment, sitting across from my son, in the warm light of my dining room, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful, but we had emerged with deeper wisdom and an unbreakable bond. I think often about that day in the church when Catherine pointed her finger at me and tried to banish me from my son's life. In standing my ground and exposing the truth, I hadn't just saved Thomas from a disastrous marriage, I had reclaimed my own power and voice. Sometimes love means letting go, but sometimes love means fighting for what matters most, even when the battle seems impossible to win. I'm grateful every day that I found the courage to fight for my son when it mattered most. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love? Or have you experienced manipulation in a relationship that isolated you from family? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else recognize the warning signs in their own life. And if you found strength or insight from our story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences and lessons learned the hard way. Remember, sometimes the most painful moments lead to the most important growth. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard.